We cannot equate wrath of this uncontrollable outburst of anger. But when you think of propitiation, it's the idea to satisfy, to appease, to divert wrath. The wrath of God is something that we must understand. It's something that we have to comprehend to go forward. I had to go get a bunch of shots before I went to school. And you all know how I feel about getting poked with needles. If you don't know, I don't handle it very well. In fact, I normally have to warn the person who gives me shots that I should be laying down before you poke me. Because moments after I'm poked, my brain goes into overdrive mode and I am laying flat, stone cold pale on the floor because I have a deficiency up here or something. Some people call it a phobia. It's truly something I cannot describe. I don't know why I do it, it just happens. But in 2003, I had gone to the doctor, Dr. Maida. And Amanda and I hadn't been dating very long, and I was driving a 1973 Dodge Charger that my dad and I had fixed up. It was my pride and joy. It was a great time in my life. I go in and they have to give me 3 different booster shots and then a TB test. And at that time, I guess I really wasn't aware of my problem. So he gives me the first of several shots, and then they give me the TB test, and a nurse comes in and she says, why don't you just sit here for a minute? And I can feel the blood leaving my head. So I sat there for a minute, and Dr. Maida was our family doctor, a great family doctor, a man that I will always hold dearly in my heart. He'd come in several times and checked on me, and they had to remove me out of the room because there was other patients to see. So they said, why don't you sit in the lobby for a while? I don't have time for this. So I proceeded. I called Amanda, and we're on the phone, and I get in my car. I started up, and that's the last thing I remember. I got in my car, backed out of that doctor's office parking lot, and passed out in my car. I went over a curb. It blew the tire in the curb, and if you ever heard a tire blown, it's pretty loud. And then I proceeded to run over a couple trees at a local nursing home before somebody dove in the car and turned the wheel so I didn't run into the building. Finally got the car stopped. I woke up laying down on a front bench seat of a 1973 Dodge Charger, which is about the same size as a love seat today, of somebody shaking me saying, Dustin, Dustin, and Amanda's faint voice that is still on the phone saying, Dustin, Dustin, are you okay? I woke up from that crazy event not knowing what had happened, but simply the last thing I remember was I got shots and it wasn't a good thing. After I look back on the path, after waking up, the first thing a young person wants to do is check on their what? The car. Make sure the car was okay. And of course, in 1973, they had the thickest metal ever known to man that they put on a front bumper of a 73 Charger that is really good for the car, but really bad for new trees and landscaping. After that moment, I was really afraid. I thought, man, they're going to take my insurance away. I had just got onto my own insurance from my parents. I can't afford. I'm a college student. How am I going to afford the price to replace the trees and the landscaping that I tore up? I'm going to have a hard time replacing the tire I blew. And that afternoon, I got a phone call. It was from a number I didn't recognize, and I thought, it's the insurance. I'm in big trouble. I can't pay this. I'm going to have to go wash dishes at the nursing home to pay for their trees. Maybe I can mow their lawn. How am I going to pay for this? And they were mad. They were very mad. They didn't seem to understand that I passed out. They didn't seem to care. But I remember the guy coming out of the nursing home yelling, "What do you think you're doing? You just ruined our landscaping." That afternoon, I got a phone call from my doctor, checking on me. How are you? Is everything okay? Because at that point, they didn't know I had this phobia. They thought maybe I had some bad reaction to the shot. And he says, I don't want you to worry about anything. I'm paying for all the trees and all the landscaping. And their wrath was satisfied. They were no longer upset because they were going to be satisfied in their replacement of their property. When you think of propitiation, it's just that. It's just the concept of God's wrath being satisfied. And when you think about what God's wrath is, we really cannot understand propitiation without understanding the wrath of God. And we're all aware of it. We're all aware of the wrath of God that's been poured out on mankind ever since the days of the flood. But we must understand wrath as this. And if you want to go ahead and go to the next idea, it's more than just putting your hand through a wall because you're upset. We cannot equate wrath of this uncontrollable outburst of anger. But when you think of propitiation, it's the idea to satisfy, to appease, to divert wrath. I can't even imagine the magnitude of the wrath of God. I can't even try to understand what it was like when those people felt those first raindrops starting, let alone how they felt as they drowned because they weren't on the ark. But the wrath of God is something that we must understand. It's something that we have to comprehend to go forward. Damon, go ahead and go to that next slide for me. It's got to be poured out. But what is it that's poured out? I like this definition of God's wrath. It's the righteous and holy response of a just God against sin and rebellion. It's a righteous and holy response of a just God, not just anger because you've done something wrong, but it's a response of sin and rebellion from a God who's given everything to them. Think about how God felt when he gave human beings the world and everything within it. And then we get to Genesis chapter 6, and the text says, and all of the actions and the thought of men were evil. And he had enough. And the wrath of God was poured out in that flood. The wrath of God was poured out on Sodom and Gomorrah because of the evil actions they were taking. Remember, Abraham had gone to him and said, if I could find 50 people that are good, couldn't do it. What about 40? What about 30? If I could find some people. And because of the sin and rebellion, the wrath of God was poured out on Sodom and Gomorrah. In Exodus chapter 7 through chapter 11, the wrath of God was poured out in the form of the 10 plagues. The hardening of Pharaoh's heart caused the wrath of God to be poured out. You could look at several different defeats of the children of Israel because they did not abide by his commands. They did not live by his rules, by his regulations. They did not defeat the enemy the way he told them to defeat the enemy, and the wrath of God was poured out. I always go to Joshua chapter 7 and think of the sin of Achan and the defeat they had because of the sin at Ai. You could think of Numbers 21 and the snakes in the wilderness because the wrath of God was poured out against those who were rebelling against him. We read books like Jeremiah, understanding the sin and the idolatry and the abominations that the children of Israel were committing. And because of that, the wrath of God was poured out on them and they were led into captivity. And then the one we sang about this morning. They bound the hands of Jesus in the garden where he prayed. They laughed and said, behold the King. They struck him and they cursed him and they mocked his holy name. They nailed him to that tree. And on that day, the wrath of God was poured out. And we know one day the final judgment will come and the wrath of God will be poured out again.